The house was too quiet. Elena woke with the weight of silence pressing against her chest, a silence broken only by the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. It wasn't just quiet. It was wrong. She blinked into the half-light filtering through the blinds, trying to remember why her throat felt dry, why the room smelled faintly metallic. Then the odor hit her fully. Rot. Dampness. Something that clung to the air like invisible fingers. She turned her head, and there he was. Daniel, her husband. Still. His skin waxy, pale, his lips bluish. One arm hung awkwardly off the side of the bed as though he had simply rolled too far in sleep. But Elena knew there would be no waking, no shifting, no breath. Her stomach lurched. For one desperate second, her hand reached for the phone on the nightstand. She imagined the call, police sirens, neighbors gathering on the lawn, judgmental eyes, whispers about what really happened in that house. She pictured Daniel's sister, accusing, and the headlines that would follow. Her hand froze. She put the phone down, slowly, deliberately. Elena rose from the bed, her bare feet pressing into the cold floorboards. She pulled the curtains tighter until not a sliver of morning light bled in. The world outside had no business looking in. She opened the windows just wide enough to let the stench slide out, though it only swirled back inside. Her pulse hammered as she looked again at Daniel. For years, she had imagined this moment, though not like this, never like this. She had pictured leaving him, not burying him in silence. Daniel had been cruel in ways that left scars hidden under clothing and words that lodged deep in her bones. Even in death, he seemed to sneer at her. "You don't get the last word," she whispered. Her voice startled her. She hadn't spoken aloud since last night, since before the shouting stopped. She moved through the house, like a ghost, picking up objects as if they could tether her to normalcy, a mug, the unopened mail, the ticking clock on the mantel. But nothing was normal. Every item was tainted by the knowledge of what lay in the bedroom. Her mind raced. She thought of the neighbors, Mrs. Calloway's prying eyes, the children riding bikes past the yard. They would notice if Daniel vanished overnight. They always noticed. And then there was the bank account, the bills piling up on the kitchen counter. If she admitted he was gone, everything would collapse. But if she pretended, the thought grew bold inside her. If she pretended Daniel was still alive, maybe she could buy time. 19 days, just long enough to get things in order, to cover her tracks, to figure out what came next. She rehearsed the story silently. He's tired, he's sick, he's working late, he's resting, lies braided together like a rope she could cling to. She took a deep breath, the sour air making her gag. The decision was sealed. Daniel would stay where he was, unseen. The house would become a stage, and she would play the part of a faithful wife keeping up appearances. Elena forced her shoulders back, her face smoothing into something almost calm. She turned the lock on the front door and pressed her palms against it, as though barricading herself against the world. The day outside was already stirring, neighbors walking dogs, cars pulling from driveways, but inside, the performance had begun. And then, the phone rang. Her body jolted. The sound sliced through the silence like a blade. She glanced toward the bedroom where Daniel would never answer again. The ringing grew louder, demanding. Her hand shook as she reached for the receiver. Whoever was on the other end would expect Daniel. They would expect his voice, his words. Elena pressed the phone to her ear, her pulse roaring in her head. "Hello?" "A familiar voice," he asked. It was his sister. Elena's breath trembled as she gripped the phone. The voice on the other end was sharp, suspicious. "Elena? It's me. Where's Daniel? He hasn't returned my calls." Her throat closed. She glanced at the bedroom door, the curtains pulled tight, the odor seeping under the crack like a dark reminder. Think. Quickly. "He's asleep," she blurted. The word left her mouth before she could measure it. Her voice cracked, thin as paper. He came home late last night from work, completely exhausted. There was a pause. Elena could hear the faint static of the line, the ticking of the wall clock, the rush of blood in her ears. Asleep? At this hour? His sister asked, disbelief cutting through the silence. Yes, Elena pushed. They've been overworking him again. You know how the company is. Always piling things on. He barely even touched dinner before he collapsed in bed. Her hands shook as she wrapped the cord around her fingers, tighter, tighter. A lie, spoken with a trembling tongue, but it was out there now, floating between them. Daniel's sister sighed, suspicion softened but not erased. Tell him to call me. Please. You know how he is. Disappears for days, leaves me worrying, sick. I can't keep guessing. I'll tell him, Elena whispered. When the call ended, she didn't hang up right away. She held the receiver against her ear as though clinging to the connection, listening to the empty hum of the dial tone. When she finally set it down, her whole body sagged forward, forehead pressing against the wall. The first lie. A simple one. But she felt its weight settle into her chest like a stone. The day unfolded under its shadow. Elena brewed coffee, her movements stiff and mechanical. She placed a second cup at the table out of habit, steam rising into the still air. It was absurd. He would never drink it. But the gesture anchored her to routine. She caught herself rehearsing silently. He's at work. He's sleeping. He's busy. He's away. Each excuse shaped itself in her mouth, each version of reality a different mask. When the mailman approached, Elena tensed. She opened the door only a sliver, enough to take the envelopes without giving him a glimpse inside. He glanced past her shoulder, as people often did, searching for Daniel's tall frame or familiar smirk. Elena forced a brittle smile. He's not here, she said before the man could ask. Long hours again. The lie slid easier this time, less jagged, more rehearsed. The performance was beginning to smooth itself into habit. But as night fell, silence grew heavier. Daniel's presence, or rather his absence, pushed against her. She imagined him still lying in the bed upstairs, jaw slack, eyes empty. She refused to go near the room, though the stench clawed at her every time she passed the staircase. Instead, she sat in the living room, clutching a throw blanket, staring at the muted television screen. Her mind replayed the call. Her voice, the hesitation, the way his sister had lingered on the word asleep. Would she call again? Would she come by? Elena's heart lurched at the thought. She could manage a phone call, yes. But if someone came to the door, if someone stepped inside, if they caught even a whiff of the truth, everything would crumble. She couldn't let that happen. The first lie had been a shield, but now it demanded reinforcements. More lies. Better ones. She would have to prepare, to act, to convince. The thought both terrified and steadied her. Elena rose, pulled a notepad from the drawer, and began writing. Scribbled notes, excuses, details of Daniel's supposed schedule. She rehearsed them like lines in a play. Every mask she put on made her skin itch, but she wore them anyway. The phone rang again. She froze, pen in hand. The shrill sound echoed through the house, sharp against a suffocating silence. This time, the call was not from family. The glowing screen showed a name that made her blood run cold. Daniel's boss. The phone call from Daniel's boss still echoed in Elena's mind hours later. Though she hadn't answered, she'd let it ring, the shrill sound clawing at her nerves until silence returned. Her hand had hovered over the receiver, but fear anchored her in place. Answering meant details. Details meant risk. She thought she had a moment to breathe, until the knock came. Sharp. 3 times. The sound rattled through the door like a warning. Elena's heart stuttered. No one knocked mid-morning unless they wanted something, unless they noticed something. She peered through the side curtain, and her stomach dropped. Mrs. Calloway, the neighbor, the one who saw everything. Mrs. Calloway was already leaning forward, eyes narrow as she scanned the windows. Her floral dress sagged at the shoulders, her hair in its usual tight bun. Elena knew that woman's memory was a steel trap. She remembered who left for work when, who came home late, who trimmed their hedges on what day. Elena inhaled deeply, forcing her face into calmness. She unlocked the door just enough to create a sliver. "Oh, Elena." Mrs. Calloway's voice was full of concern, but her gaze was sharp. "I haven't seen Daniel in days. Everything all right?" Elena's lips trembled. The lie pressed forward, rehearsed, waiting. "He's resting. Work has been exhausting lately. He's barely gotten out of bed." Mrs. Calloway tilted her head, unsatisfied. "Strange. He usually waters the lawn by now, and the car hasn't moved since Sunday." Elena's hands clenched the edge of the door. "He's tired, that's all. A bug going around at the office." For a long moment, Mrs. Calloway simply looked at her. Elena felt the weight of those eyes, the suspicion crawling closer. Then, slowly, the neighbor shifted her gaze past Elena's shoulder, toward the darkened hallway, toward the faint shadow of the bedroom door at the top of the stairs. Elena's brana, Eth caught. "May I?" Mrs. Calloway took a small step forward, as though testing the threshold, 1 foot nearly inside the house. The faint stench from upstairs slipped into the entryway, carried on the still air. Elena's heart thudded so loud she thought it might betray her. She pushed the door tighter, her voice sharp now. "No, he doesn't want visitors. He needs rest." Mrs. Calloway blinked, startled by the sudden firmness. Her foot retreated, but her suspicion lingered in the narrowing of her eyes. All right," she murmured, though her tone said otherwise. "You tell Daniel I said hello, and that I'm praying for his quick recovery." "I will," Elena whispered. Mrs. Calloway gave one last, lingering glance toward the staircase before stepping back across the porch. She moved slowly, deliberately, as though making a mental note of every detail. Elena shut the door quickly, sliding the lock into place, pressing her forehead against the wood. The house pressed in around her, heavy, suffocating. She could almost hear Daniel's body upstairs, silent but accusing. The air seemed thicker now, the walls closer. Her performance had worked, for now. But Elena knew Mrs. Calloway would not stop watching. She never did. And then, from the kitchen, the phone began to ring again. This time, Elena couldn't ignore it. The phone's ring clawed through the silence, each chime a reminder that the outside world was pressing in. Elena stood frozen in the hallway, the echo of Mrs. Calloway's footsteps still fresh in her ears. She didn't answer the call. Instead, she turned slowly toward the staircase. The smell lingered heavier now, pulling her upward like a chain. As she stepped into the bedroom, her gaze landed on Daniel's still body. Even in death, he seemed to dominate the room, the broad shoulders under the sheet, the way his hand had fallen across the mattress as though to claim space. Her stomach twisted. For a moment, the sight blurred, and in its place came memories, shadows clawing from the past. Nights when his voice cut sharper than glass. Nights when her arms burned with the sting of fingers that gripped too tightly. Nights when she had swallowed back sobs in the bathroom, sleeves tugged low to hide what no one should have seen. She remembered the arguments that always began small, a misplaced receipt, a dinner too cold, a smile at the wrong stranger. His fury rose fast, the way a storm rolls across the horizon before anyone realizes the sky has changed. "You spend too much," he'd hiss, slamming the ledger on the table. "Do you think money grows in my pocket? Every dollar you waste is food ripped from our mouths." Her attempts to defend herself never mattered. He controlled the bank account. He controlled the car keys. He even counted the groceries as though she were a child in need of punishment. And yet, it wasn't the shouting that haunted her most. It was the quiet that followed. The chilling silence when he turned his back, leaving her to stew in the shame he crafted so carefully. Silence that reminded her she was trapped. Elena's hands trembled as she now pulled the sheet higher over his chest. She had lived years beneath his shadow, trained to bend, to lower her gaze, to apologize for sins she hadn't committed. And now the shadow was gone. Her lips curved, though not into a smile. Something darker, heavier. She whispered into the stale air, "You can't hurt me anymore." The thought startled her, not with guilt, but with relief. It grew clearer the longer she stood in that room. Every hour that she hid his body, every lie that slid from her tongue, it all felt like a reversal of power. Daniel's silence became her weapon. She decided when the curtains closed, when the neighbors were answered, when the world believed her fabricated version of his existence. For the first time in years, she held control. Still, her eyes darted toward the door, as though expecting him to rise, to sneer, to grip her by the wrist until the bones bruised. The corpse didn't move. The silence held. But her heart thudded violently, half fear, half exhilaration. She sank into the armchair by the window, staring at the faint glow of the street lamp outside. The house had changed. She could feel it. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind through the glass seemed louder, like the walls themselves were learning her secret. Elena thought of Mrs. Calloway's watchful eyes, of the unanswered phone calls. Danger pressed close, yet the defiance burned hotter. She wasn't ready to give Daniel up, not yet. His absence had given her something intoxicating. Control. Her hand brushed her sleeve, remembering the bruises that used to bloom there. They had faded, but the memory had not. She had once been powerless. Now, she was keeper of the story, the gatekeeper of truth and lie. Elena closed her eyes and whispered again, firmer this time, "You can't hurt me anymore." And from the kitchen, as though mocking her newfound resolve, the phone rang again, this time longer, insistent, demanding to be answered. The phone's ringing carried on into the night, each chime scraping Elena's nerves raw. She let it echo, unmoving in the armchair by the window. Answering meant risk. Ignoring meant something worse. Unpaid bills, hungry creditors, cracks widening where her lies already stretched thin. By dawn, she had made her decision. The stack of envelopes sat on the kitchen counter. Final notices, past due, threats of suspension. Daniel had always kept their finances under his thumb. Even when the power bill arrived, she wasn't allowed to pay it. "You'll just screw it up," he'd say, snatching the paper from her hands. Now those envelopes stared at her like silent accusers. Elena pulled Daniel's old checkbook from the drawer. The pen felt heavy between her fingers, her pulse fluttering as she bent over the counter. She practiced his signature, slanted, impatient strokes, over and over on scrap paper until the letters blurred. When she finally pressed the pen to the real check, her hand trembled, but the forgery looked close enough. Close enough, she told herself. At the bank, the lobby smelled of antiseptic and fresh paper. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, amplifying her heartbeat. She clutched the check tightly as she waited her turn. A line of strangers shifted around her, faces indifferent, but Elena felt every glance prick her skin like a needle. "Next!" the teller called. Elena stepped forward, sliding the check across the counter. "Just withdrawing," she said, her voice steady but thin. The teller, a young woman with neat braids and sharp eyes, examined the check carefully. For a moment, Elena thought she lingered too long on the signature. But then came the mechanical smile. "One moment." Elena's throat dried as the woman tapped on her keyboard. She forced herself not to fidget, to hold her posture. Inside, panic swirled. What if the forgery failed? What if questions followed? What if someone, anyone, discovered the truth upstairs in her house? The teller finally counted out the bills and slid them under the glass. Elena exhaled too quickly. Relief washed through her, thin but intoxicating. She clutched the cash as though it were oxygen, as though it proved she could keep control of the story. By the time she returned home, she had paid 2 overdue notices online, the balances glowing cleared on the screen. For a flicker of a moment, it felt like victory. She had outmaneuvered Daniel's grip, even from beyond the grave, but victory carried shadows. At the bank, the teller had not forgotten. The signature had seemed rushed, not quite like the others on file. Training dictated she say nothing to the customer, but she had quietly flagged the transaction for review. A notation slid into the system. Signature variance, monitor account. Elena knew none of this as she sat at the kitchen table, smoothing the crisp bills between her fingers. But the unease still crept in, subtle and unrelenting. She glanced toward the stairs, to the closed bedroom door. She whispered under her breath, "I'm handling it, Daniel. I'm handling everything now." The house seemed to press in tighter, the silence heavier than before. Outside, a dog barked. A car door slammed. Life went on beyond her walls, yet inside she lived in the narrowing space between her lies and the corpse upstairs. As night fell, Elena placed the leftover bills in a jar at the back of the pantry. She sat in the dark kitchen, staring at the glowing numbers on the clock. Paid bills, cleared balances, control for now. Then came another sound, the quiet hum of her cell phone vibrating against the counter. Unknown number. Her chest tightened. Slowly she picked it up. "Mrs. Vega?" A man's voice, professional, calm. "This is Mr. Langley from the bank. We just have a couple of routine questions, Reggie, regarding your husband's account." Elena froze, pulse hammering. The first seed of suspicion had been planted. The phone call from the bank had left Elena shaken. She had managed to deflect, her voice trembling but controlled, insisting Daniel was resting and had authorized everything. The man on the line hadn't pressed further, but his calm tone carried an unspoken warning. Someone was watching now. By the time the sun had sunk and the house folded into darkness, Elena's nerves were frayed. She double-checked the locks, drew the curtains, and sat in the kitchen with the lights off, listening to the hollow tick of the wall clock. Then came the sound. 3 faint taps at the back door. Not the front, never the front. Her chest tightened. She rose slowly, bare feet against the cold linoleum, and pulled the curtain aside. There he was, framed by the weak glow of the porch light. Michael. She unlocked the door, and he slipped inside with the urgency of someone carrying both desire and danger. His scent, sawdust and cologne, hit her first. Then the weight of his presence filled the tiny kitchen. "Elena," he whispered, closing the door behind him. "This has gone on too long." Her throat tightened at the sound of his voice. She wanted to collapse into his arms, but fear held her spine rigid. "You shouldn't be here," she hissed. The neighbors already suspect something." Michael cut her off, his tone sharp. His eyes flicked upward toward the second floor. "And you're still keeping him here?" She followed his gaze, dread clawing her stomach. Daniel's body, sealed away in the dark bedroom, seemed to throb in her mind like a hidden wound. "I told you," she whispered. 19 days, just 19. After that, I'll have enough money, and we can leave. Together." Michael's jaw tightened. "You think you can outsmart the bank, the neighbors, his family. Every lie is another thread unraveling, Elena. You're gambling with fire. Her hands shook as she gripped the edge of tea. He countered. You don't understand. I lived under him like a prisoner. He controlled every dollar, every word. This, she gestured vaguely toward the stairs, this is my freedom. For once, I decide when it ends. Michael stepped closer, lowering his voice. You're free now. He's gone. But you're not acting like it. You're tying yourself to his corpse. His words landed heavy, raw. Elena closed her eyes, fighting the swell of anger and fear. His corpse. Even the word made her recoil. She turned on him suddenly, voice breaking. Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I dreamed of nights sitting in a house that stinks of rot, lying to everyone, waiting for it to collapse on me? Her chest heaved, tears burning hot in her eyes. I loved you because you were the only thing that felt alive. Don't take this from me, too. For a moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the low hum of the refrigerator. Then Michael softened. He reached for her hand, rough fingers brushing hers. Elena, he murmured, we could leave tonight. Forget the money. Forget the plan. Just walk away. His touch made her ache, but his words struck the iron wall of her resolve. She shook her head violently. No. If we run now, we'll have nothing. And without money, we'll never be free. I won't crawl into another cage, Michael. I can't. His expression hardened again, torn between devotion and dread. He glanced toward the stairs once more, as though expecting Daniel himself to come stomping down in rage. But the silence held, thick and suffocating. Michael pulled back, jaw clenched. 19 days, he said finally. But every day you stay in this house, the noose tightens. She turned away, refusing to meet his eyes. Then let it tighten, she whispered, as long as it's mine. For a long moment he lingered, caught between leaving and staying. Then he slipped back out into the night, the back door clicking shut behind him. Elena stood alone in the dark kitchen, trembling, staring at the money jar in the pantry. Upstairs, Daniel's silence pressed down heavier than ever, and somewhere beyond the walls a shadow stirred, the first sign that someone else was beginning to watch. When Michael slipped out into the night, Elena lingered in the kitchen long after the door clicked shut. Silence stretched heavy, pressing from every corner of the house. But it wasn't silence alone that haunted her now. It was the air itself. The odor had grown bolder. What had once been a faint whisper creeping down the hallway was now a suffocating presence, curling through vents, clinging to curtains, seeping into her hair and clothes. By morning, she heard it in the neighbors' voices. From the open window, fragments of conversation drifted across the fence. Something's off. Smells like an animal, maybe? No, worse. Her stomach churned. Mrs. Calloway's shrill tone carried above the rest, sharp and certain. It's coming from Elena's place. Panic surged through her veins. Elena tore through the house, determined to erase what could not be erased. She dragged bottles of bleach from beneath the sink, sloshing it across tile and floorboards until the air burned her nostrils raw. She lit every candle she could find, their flames flickering against shadowed walls. She sprayed perfume in heavy bursts, the sweet cloying scent mixing grotesquely with decay. But it was like dressing a wound that would not stop bleeding. She moved room to room, windows cracked open, fans humming in vain. Sweat soaked her blouse, her throat raw from the fumes, and still the stench rose, an invisible tide. Upstairs, the closed door seemed to pulse with it. No matter how tightly she sealed it, death slipped through. A knock at the front door froze her mid-step. Elena hesitated, wiping sweat from her brow. She forced her breathing steady and pulled the door open just enough. A delivery man stood on the porch, a small package balanced on his palm. His smile faltered almost instantly, yet the air between them carried it, the undeniable rot. His face twitched, nose wrinkling as he leaned back slightly. Package for Vega? He asked, voice uncertain. Elena snatched it quickly, muttering, "Thank you," and tried to shut the door before the moment stretched too long. But she saw it in his eyes. He had noticed. Not enough to speak. Not yet. But enough to remember. Another silent witness added to the growing list. She closed the door, pressing her back against it, chest heaving. Her mind replayed the look on his face, the way he instinctively recoiled. Soon, someone would speak. Someone would make a call. Elena lit another candle, her fingers trembling, wax dripping onto her skin. She told herself the bleach, the perfume, the endless cover-ups would be enough to buy her time. 19 days. That was the number she clung to, as if repeating it could anchor her sanity. But even as she whispered it under her breath, 19 days. 19 days. The air mocked her. The smell of death did not bend to her control, and now others had begun to notice. By the following evening, Elena felt her walls closing in. The bleach had settled into her skin, her clothes reeked of artificial sweetness, and yet the stench still clung to the house. No matter how many candles burned, no matter how wide the windows gaped, death would not be disguised. And now, the phone would not stop ringing. At first, she let it ring out, the shrill tone slicing through her already frayed nerves. But when the answering machine clicked, she heard a familiar voice, warm, persistent, and far too curious. "Hey, it's Martin. Haven't heard from Daniel in a while. Put him on, will you?" Elena's stomach dropped. Martin was not just a friend, he was practically family, the kind of man who could walk through the front door unannounced and expect a seat at the table. She gripped the phone with clammy fingers, her mind racing. He's busy, Martin," she stammered, forcing a weak laugh. "Work's been exhausting." "Exhausting? Come on, Lena, just put him on. I'll be quick." Her throat closed. She pictured Daniel upstairs, skin collapsing into itself, silence thicker than the lies she spun. "He's asleep," she managed. "Finally resting. Doctor said he needs it." The pause on the line was unbearable. "You sound off," Martin said slowly. "Let me hear his voice. Just put the phone near him." Elena's vision tunneled. Her fingers shook as she scrambled for an excuse. But then, like lightning through the fog, she remembered something. Daniel's voicemail. The message he had recorded months ago, still waiting inside the machine. A spark of madness lit in her chest. "I'll call you back," she whispered, hanging up before he could answer. Hard hammering, she tore through drawers, pulling out the small recorder Daniel once used for dictations. She found the old voicemail tape, his voice preserved in cheerful monotone. "Hey, it's Daniel. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." The sound sent a shiver down her spine. For a moment, she could almost pretend he was still alive, down the hall in another room, working late, anything but what he really was. That night, she set up the recorder by the phone. When Martin called again, demanding to speak, she pressed play. Daniel's voice filled the line. "Hey, it's Daniel. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." Elena held her breath. Martin chuckled. "Ha, you've got him screening calls now? Typical." But his laughter sounded strained, uncertain. "Yeah," Elena forced herself to reply. "You know how he is. Always hiding from people when he's tired." She hung up quickly, hands trembling so hard she nearly dropped the phone. Relief flooded her, but beneath it lay something darker. She had pulled Daniel's ghost into the living world, not through memory, but through technology. A hollow echo paraded as truth. And with each call that came in, she replayed the trick. Friends, co-workers, even Daniel's sister, whose voice cracked with concern. Each time, Elena used the recording, weaving his absence into a cruel illusion. But with each press of the button, she felt herself slip further. The voice no longer sounded detached to her. It sounded alive. She began to answer it, whispering replies into the silence after the beep. Sometimes she caught herself smiling at his words. Sometimes she caught herself weeping. And sometimes, in the late hours when the candles burned low, she swore she heard his voice bleed beyond the machine, deeper, harsher, almost angry. Lena. She would jolt upright, staring into the darkness, certain that Daniel was calling from the bedroom. Her lies had saved her for now, but they were no longer lies alone. They were becoming a prison of their own, a looping performance she could not step away from. As she set the recorder down once more, her reflection in the darkened window caught her eye, hollow-eyed, pale, lips twitching with a smile that was not hers. And then the phone rang again. This time, the caller ID displayed something that made her blood run cold. The bank. The phone had barely gone silent when the doorbell rang. Elena's heart lurched. She froze in the center of the living room, staring at the door as if it might burst inward. Through the frosted glass, she saw the unmistakable silhouettes. Two figures, broad, steady, their posture official. The faint squawk of a radio confirmed her dread. Police. Her breath hitched, the air suddenly too thick. She smoothed her hair with trembling fingers, forcing her lips into a curve that resembled a smile. Then she opened the door. "Mrs. Grayson?" the taller officer asked, his voice polite but firm. His partner, a younger man with sharp eyes, scanned the porch as though memorizing every detail. "We're here to perform a welfare check. A report was filed after unusual activity at the bank in your husband's name." Elena blinked, feigning confusion. "A report? That's surprising." She forced a small laugh, though it rang hollow in the heavy air. "Daniel's fine. He's just been under the weather, resting a lot lately." The older officer nodded slowly, though his gaze flicked past her shoulder. "May we come in, ma'am?" Panic spiked, but she stepped aside, careful to angle her body so that the hallway beyond remained partially hidden. The smell lingered faintly in the air despite her relentless scrubbing, an undercurrent of decay masked with lavender and bleach. She prayed the candles burning in every corner might be enough. The officers entered, boots heavy against the wood floor. Their eyes swept the room with professional detachment, but Elena caught the subtle wrinkle of the younger man's nose. "Just a routine matter," the older one reassured, though his tone carried an edge. "Could we speak to Mr. Grayson directly?" Her mouth went dry. "He's sleeping, upstairs. Doctor ordered rest." The younger officer tilted his head. "Strange. Middle of the day, and he's been unavailable by phone, too. Would you mind if we just checked on him?" Every muscle in her body stiffened. She moved quickly, planting herself in front of the hallway. Her smile faltered but didn't break. "I'm sorry, he'd be furious if I woke him. Daniel's temper. You understand? The last thing I want is to undo the doctor's work." The officers exchanged a glance. The silence between them was louder than words. "Mrs. Grayson," the older officer said gently, "we only need to confirm he's all right. Then we'll leave you in peace." She shook her head too fast, too forcefully. "No, I won't disturb him. I won't." The younger one's eyes narrowed, suspicion sharpening his features. He sniffed again, almost imperceptibly, then looked toward the dim hallway. "Do you smell that?" he murmured to his partner. Elena's pulse thundered in her ears. She wanted to scream at them to leave, to beg, to shove them out the door. Instead, she pressed a hand to her chest, forcing a brittle laugh. I've been cleaning. Too much bleach, maybe. Makes the air heavy. The officers didn't answer. The silence stretched unbearably, broken only by the faint buzz of a candle wick sputtering in the corner. At last, the older officer nodded. We'll note our visit, but if concerns persist, another check will be scheduled. Please make sure your husband contacts the bank directly. It's important. Relief nearly buckled Elena's knees. She ushered them to the door, thanking them with a politeness that tasted of blood. When the latch finally clicked shut, she sagged against the wood, her whole body trembling. Through the window, she watched them walk to the patrol car, pausing once to glance back at the house. The younger one lingered, his eyes narrowing again, as though he could see straight through the walls to the truth she hid. Only when the engine turned over and the car rolled away did Elena let herself slide to the floor. But even in their absence, the stench seemed stronger. And she knew this was only the first knock. The morning of the 19th day arrived with an oppressive stillness. Elena stood at the window, staring at the world outside as if it belonged to someone else. Neighbors watered their lawns. Children pedaled bikes across the street. The rhythm of life beat on, blind to the secret festering inside her house. Her body was exhausted, her nerves shredded. The candles had all but burned to stubs, their wicks drowning in wax. Perfume bottles lay empty, their sickly sweetness clinging to the curtains. Yet no mask could overpower the truth anymore. The odor of death pulsed through the walls like a living thing. When the knock came, it wasn't tentative this time. It was heavy, determined. Elena Grayson, police. Open the door. Her heart crumpled. She had rehearsed this moment in whispers to herself, promising that she could last just one more day, just one more night. Tomorrow she would leave, vanish with the money, begin again. But tomorrow had arrived too soon. She opened the door slowly. The same officers stood there, this time with two more behind them. Their faces were grave, their eyes sharper than before. Mrs. Grayson, the older officer said, voice clipped. We need to check the premises immediately. Complaints have been filed. The odor, the inconsistencies. This is no longer optional. Her lips parted, but no lie formed. The words had dried up. All she managed was a frantic shake of the head, stepping sideways to block the hallway again. The younger officer brushed past her. Enough games. His voice was hard now. Where is he? No, please. Elena's cry broke, raw and desperate. She grabbed his arm, but her strength was a shadow of what it once was. The officer shrugged her off with little effort, pushing down the hall. The others followed. Their boots pounded like war drums. Elena stumbled after them, her breaths sharp, shallow gasps. When they reached the bed, room door locked tight, silence fell. The younger officer rattled the knob, then turned to his partner. Break it! The crash of wood splintering echoed like thunder. The door slammed inward, and the world shifted. The stench erupted, unmasked and unbearable, filling the air with the truth Elena had fought to bury. The officers froze, their expressions hardening into horror as their eyes fell upon the bed. Daniel lay wrapped in sheets that clung to his form like a grotesque cocoon. His face, half exposed, was sunken and gray, his features warped by decay. Flies scattered in a sudden frenzy, the buzz of their wings cutting through the stunned silence. Elena collapsed against the doorframe. I just needed time, she whispered, her voice so small it was nearly lost in the chaos of the moment. Tears streaked down her face, but they carried no relief, only the weight of inevitability. One officer covered his mouth with a sleeve, another muttered something sharp into his radio. The younger one turned back toward Elena, his eyes burning with something between disgust and pity. You lived with this, he said quietly. 19 days. She nodded once, trembling, unable to defend herself. The rehearsed lies, The justifications, the excuses, none of them mattered anymore. The house had spoken for her. Her knees buckled and she fell to the floor, palms pressing against the cold wood. For the first time in weeks, there was no need to pretend. Daniel was dead. The performance was over. Yet freedom didn't come. The click of handcuffs snapped around her wrists, metal biting into her skin. As the officers pulled her upright, she caught one last glimpse of the bedroom, of the ruin she had guarded like a shrine. Not free, not safe, just caught. And outside, the neighborhood carried on, unaware that the silence behind the Grayson home had finally shattered. The interrogation room was stark. Gray walls, metal table, a single buzzing light that seemed intent on exposing every fracture in Elena's face. Her wrists ached from the cuffs that had only just been removed, her skin marked with angry red circles. She sat slumped in the chair, her hair clinging to damp cheeks, her breathing shallow. 2 detectives entered. One, Detective Harris, older and calm, carried a legal pad. The other, Detective Moore, younger and sharper, watched her like a hawk circling wounded prey. "Elena Grayson," Harris began, lowering himself into the chair opposite her. "You've been arrested on suspicion of concealment of a corpse, fraud, and possible obstruction. But we want to hear your side. This is your chance." At first, she said nothing. Her fingers traced the edge of the table, trembling. Then the dam inside her broke. "You don't understand," she whispered. "Nobody ever understood." Moore leaned forward. "Then make us understand. Tell us what happened." Her eyes darted between them, glassy with tears, then down to her lap. Words spilled, uneven and raw. "Daniel. He wasn't the man everyone thought he was. To them, he was charming, reliable. But at home?" Her voice cracked, sharp with pain. "He controlled everything. My money, my friends, my body. If I bought groceries without his approval, he'd shout for hours, sometimes worse." She tugged at her sleeve as if hiding bruises still etched in memory. Harris's pen scratched against paper. He didn't interrupt. "I tried to leave," she continued, anger rising with each syllable. "More than once. But he'd find me, drag me back, tell me I was nothing without him, and I started believing it." Her nails dug into the metal table, a screech filling the silence. Moore's tone softened, just slightly. "And Michael? Who is he?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. Shame painted her cheeks, but she forced the words out. "Michael was escape. He cared for me, listened, held me when Daniel's rage left me shaking. It was wrong, but it was the only time I felt alive." "Did Michael know Daniel was dead?" Harris asked, voice steady. Elena hesitated, then nodded, slow and deliberate. "Yes. He came to the house. He begged me to call the police to stop pretending. But I couldn't. Don't you see?" Her voice rose, echoing off the walls. "This was the first time I had power. For 19 days, Daniel couldn't hurt me, couldn't shout, couldn't strike, couldn't sneer. He was silent, and I controlled the silence." Tears streamed freely now, mingling with her fury. "I thought if I could just hold it together, pay the bills, gather the money, I could disappear. Start over. Be free." Moore shook his head. "Free? By living with his rotting body in your bedroom?" Her breath hitched. "You think I don't know how insane it sounds? Every day, the smell, the flies, the fear, it tore at me. But the idea of him gone forever, without anyone else controlling the story, that was the only thing that kept me standing." The room fell into a heavy silence. Harris set his pen down, studying her with tired eyes. "So this was about control," he said quietly. "After years of being controlled, Elena met his gaze, her expression hollow. It was never about justice or revenge. Just survival. My way of surviving, twisted as it was. Moore leaned back, exhaling sharply, as if trying to expel the stench of her words. Harris closed his notebook, his face unreadable. "Elena Grayson," he said, voice formal once more. "Your confession has been recorded. It will go to the court." Her shoulders sagged. There was no relief in the admission, only the crushing weight of finality. For 19 days, she had clung to silence. Now, with every word laid bare, there was nothing left to hide. And yet, as the door clicked, Ed shut behind the detectives, Elena realized the truth. Silence had been her prison, but confession would be her sentence. The courtroom was colder than Elena expected, not in temperature, but in atmosphere, an air of judgment that pressed down like stone. She sat at the defense table, hands folded in her lap, her wrists bare now but still etched with invisible chains. The prosecution began with precision. Photographs of Daniel's decomposed body flashed across the screen, the jurors recoiling as the images filled their vision. The prosecutor's voice rang clear, slicing through the silence. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is not a case of grief. This is not a case of trauma. This is a woman who chose deception. She forged documents. She lied to family, neighbors, the police. She slept beside her husband's corpse for 19 days, all while taking his money. This was not survival. This was manipulation." Elena's stomach churned. Each word felt like a blade. When it was the defense's turn, her lawyer rose, his tone steady but weighted with urgency. "What you've heard is true, but not the whole truth. Elena Grayson was a victim long before Daniel's death. For years, she endured cruelty, control, physical and psychological abuse. When Daniel died, she saw a chance, yes, a twisted one, to reclaim control of her life. She was not playing God. She was clinging to existence. Do not confuse desperation with evil." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. The divide was clear. Some eyes shone with pity, others with disgust. Witnesses were called. Daniel's sister took the stand, her voice shaking. "She could have called us. She could have told someone. Instead, she shut us out. That's not the act of a victim. It's the act of someone who wanted to erase him." Then Michael appeared, eyes downcast, hands clasped too tightly. He admitted their affair. Admitted he begged Elena to end the charade. "She was broken," he said softly. "I thought I could save her. But she wouldn't let go of the lie. She needed it more than she needed me." Elena listened, her insides twisting, her shame laid bare for all to see. Finally, the judge instructed the jury. "Your duty is not to judge her marriage, her morality, or her sins of passion. Your duty is to decide whether her actions after Daniel Grayson's death were crimes under the law." The jury filed out. Hours bled together, each tick of the clock hammering against Elena's ribs. She stared at her reflection in the polished table, wondering which version of herself the world saw, the battered wife or the manipulator. When the jury returned, the room held its breath. The foreman rose, paper trembling in his grip. "On the charge of concealment of a corpse, guilty. On the charge of fraud, guilty. On the charge of obstruction, guilty." The words echoed like bells tolling in the distance. Elena closed her eyes. The verdict was expected, yet it struck her like a blow all the same. She felt her lawyer's hand on her shoulder, a gesture meant to steady her, but it offered no anchor. The judge's gavel came down. Sentencing would follow in weeks, but the path was already carved. Prison, whispers, a future defined by the stench of those 19 days. Yet what lingered most was not the word guilty, but the unspoken question that rippled through the room, heavy and unresolved. Was this justice for Daniel, or punishment for Elena? As she was led away, chains clinking once more around her wrists, Elena glanced back at the courtroom. Some faces glared with hatred, others softened with sorrow. Truth and justice blurred, indistinguishable in the shadows of human frailty. The door closed behind her, and the world kept moving forward, while Elena remained trapped in the darkness of her choices, awaiting a sentence that could never match the one she had already given herself.